Okay, welcome to the Town Hall session, everyone. I'm Stuart Finn from Earth Observation Australia and the University of Queensland, and I'll be co-hosting this with Dr. Amy Parker from CSIRO. Amy, did you want to just turn your camera on and introduce yourself? Okay, we'll keep going, and I think Amy will jump back in a minute. So, okay, sorry, Amy, did you want to say hi? Sorry.
Hi, thanks, Stuart. Good morning, everyone in Western Australia. Good afternoon, everyone on the other side of the country. Great to be with you today. We would first like to introduce our town hall speakers to you this morning. So we've condensed their very impressive CVs and introductions down to a single sentence. So I'll start off with Reese Peterson. Reese, can you give us a wave there? Reese is director of the Earth Observation Programme for the Australian Space Agency, and he started his career studying at Queensland University of Technology and brings 20 years of experience working in the Department of Defence. Good morning, Reese. Next we have Donna. Donna, can you give us a wave? Donna is coming at this from a slightly different perspective. She's worked with satellites for the last 20 years, but from a legal standpoint, and she is actually co-founder and principal at Azimuth Advisory, which is Australia's first legal practice specialising in space activities. So great to have you with us this morning, Donna. Next up we have Jono, Jonathan Ross. Give us a wave. Jono is Director of National Planning and International Relations at Geoscience Australia's Earth and Marine Observation Branch, and that involves coordinating the development and implementation of national strategies for Earth observation. So it'd be really interesting to have your perspectives today. Next up, we have Elisa Starkey. Can you give us a wave? Elisa is the founder and Science Solutions Lead at AUSIUS, which she founded in 2014. And the concept behind that is to make advanced Earth observation analytics more accessible and to empower business decisions. And then our final member of the panel this morning is Kate Williams. Give us a wave, Kate. Kate is Chief Business Officer of Frontier SI, and she has 2 decades of experience in geospatial project management across the private and public sectors. And Kate was awarded the Women's Leadership Award in the 2019 Victorial Spatial Excellence Awards. So that's our panel that we have this morning for our town hall.
Thanks very much, Amy, and welcome everyone. We're just going to do a little bit of an introduction to begin with in terms of what we're going to try and achieve today. And I want to preface that with one of the main objectives of Earth Observation Australia as an organisation. And I should also acknowledge that Amy is the Vice President of Earth Observation Australia, is that this is about bringing all people together to understand what's happening and where it's going. And this town hall is really about where is it going and listening to everybody's, I guess, thoughts on that as well. So what we're trying to focus on in the town hall is how can the different Earth observation communities work together across all of those different groups which you see listed there, the different levels of government, industry, startups, small and medium enterprise, education, research, and defence, to build our individual and national capabilities to help with the operation of society, economy, all of those sorts of things. So we're going to pull together some of the longer term planning activities so you get to hear about them as a community, but also react to them and also listen to the panel's thoughts on these and where we're actually going as well. So the aim of the town hall is to give us a basis to go forward from today about how to work together. So hopefully everyone gets a better sense of what's happening in Earth observation across Australia, and where government, industry, and other groups are actually trying to go, and how we can work together. So the intended outcome is a shared understanding of national goals and expectations. So as an Australian group, we can work together and also work globally to move forwards. So in terms of expectations, we'll give you a little bit of context. We're going to hear from the panel several times, and we'll also be providing you some tools to interact with us, and we'll pull those things together. So we've just done the introductions to the panels already. So I'm just going to give you a little bit more context before we jump into the actual discussion of things. So there's 4 key documents I want to mention briefly, and a lot of people who are on the call now, have been part of putting these together over the last 5, 10 plus years. There's a community plan from Earth Observation Australia that goes out to 2026. There's a combined industry, government, defence, community roadmap that combines space with a C and spatial with a T, and that goes to 2030, and that's in a consultation phase at the moment. The Space Agency is currently in the middle of finalising a civil space roadmap for Earth observation. Earth observation is one of the 7 priorities or pillars of our National Space Agency. And then lastly, the Australian Academy of Sciences is putting together a decadal plan for space sciences, again, a 10-year plan. So why are these things relevant to what we're doing? The Earth Observation Australia 10-year plan, for those of you that are not familiar with Earth Observation Australia, it's everyone that collects, processes and uses Earth observation data, not just from satellites, but from aircraft and drones. You don't have to pay to be a member, and we try to be across all the different community sectors. In 2016, we produced a national plan based on everyone's input. We went out and said, what do you want to do? What do you need to do over the next 5 or 10 years to make Earth observation work for you? And it had 5 priorities. I'll come to those in a second. One of those priorities was a focus on national communication and coordination. So this event is really the first big sort of taxi off the rank there, and it'll continue next year. The plan, which I said was built from national consultation, and it's got 5 key priorities. Since 2016, we've been able to use it to drive a lot of activities of getting Earth observation included in funding aspects of infrastructure in research, government from state to Commonwealth levels, participating in international programs, and it's stepping up even more. So we'd encourage you to have a look at that plan. There are the 5 components of the plan, or the 5 priorities. This wasn't just a bunch of old dudes sitting in Canberra. Apologies to all the people sitting in Canberra coming up with a plan. It was from across the country, and there's each of those priorities have got activities behind it. We're really in part 1 at the moment. The second document is the Space and Spatial Industry Growth Roadmap. This is under consultation at the moment. That diagram on the right is complex, but it's complex necessarily, because what it does show is the number of government groups, industry groups in both the space and spatial sectors that need to work together, to build access to Earth observation data streams, position, navigation and timing data streams. So all of that can be used in government and industry. That's out for comment at the moment, and I'd encourage you to engage with it. It's got 24 key issues that you can engage with. If you haven't heard of this before, please hop on and have a look at it. The Space Agency is establishing an Earth observation roadmap. It's part of the Civil Space Strategy. Earth observation is a number of components, as you can see there on the right there. The roadmap is primarily focused on that collection, ground segment and storage component. to focus on analysis and tailoring. And we'll hear more about this later on. The last one is the Academy of Sciences decadal plan. This is primarily about science to support space-related activities. That's also going through a consultation at the moment. All right, so having gone through all of those, that's the context. A lot of people who are on the panel are involved in all of those activities in a lot of detail. What we're going to do now is just briefly do two things, going around the panel, and I'll get Amy to moderate that to get quick fire thoughts. But we're also going to ask you to provide your own thoughts on that question, which is, in 5 years' time, what do you want the Earth observation capability in Australia to look like? And Karen's posted a link in the chat window to Menti. So while you're listening to people's thoughts, try and sort of put one word in there. So I'll hand it over to Amy now, just to go through this first rapid fire round.
Thanks, Stuart, and thanks for that great overview and for setting the scene for us this morning. So we're going to go through the panel and get their thoughts on just that question, Australian Earth Observation 2026, what does it look like? So we'll start off with Jonathan Ross from Geoscience Australia. Jono, what does Earth observation at 2026 look like?
Yes, thanks, Amy, and thanks, Stuart, for the great scene setting as well. I think for us, Earth Observation Australia is very much the glue for delivering on the 2026 plan. It very much has to be a community effort, and all those things you mentioned are definitely areas where EOA has made a big contribution. Look, I guess I'll give a bit of a GA perspective. As the National Land Remote Sense Agency, we very much see ourselves as serving this community. We support the community to access the data and infrastructure it needs so that we can put EO to work here in Australia. But we're also trying to smooth the way for our EO expertise to be exported to the world. I guess 2026, to abuse an already overused phrase, we're definitely on the cusp of a golden age for EO in terms of data, compute, analysis tools. But to be frank, between now and 2026, there are definitely some areas that are going to need our attention as a community if we are to make the most of EO here and position ourselves globally. And I'll just touch on a few of those because I think they're big challenges, but by 2026, I believe we will have achieved them. I think we will have redoubled our efforts to develop applications that are multi-source, i.e. not dependent on any one sensor or satellite. And those applications will be richer for users when times are good, but they'll be more robust if data supply is disrupted. I think we really will have got on the front foot as the world leaders in providing and quality assuring trusted derived products. More data and high resolution is one thing, but trusted insights is going to be the key to the next step in my view. We're going to need to take the lead on integrating space and non-space EO. I think we can make a big step up in that over the next 5 years, and EOA having that broader scope will help us to do that. And I think we are going to have to scale up our own satellite manufacturing and operations capability. But we're going to have to be smart about how we do that. And by 2026, I think there are some really targeted ways we can address gaps and support partners while also progressively building our own capability and flight heritage so we can do more for ourselves and others. Thanks.
Fantastic. Thanks, Jono. Lots for us to take in there. Donna, over to you.
Thank you so much. My quick thoughts are, I think we are going to see, I agree with Jonathan, we're going to see more Australian involvement. We have clients who are building Earth observation capabilities right now. We're aware that there's also Aquawatch at CSIRO. There are a number of Australian programs. I think we're going to be seeing more Australian involvement, more Australian built and maybe even launched satellites, observation satellites, more in-space processing. So at the moment, we've got a limitation on spectrum and we've got a limitation on downlinks. But if we start processing ourselves in space, Spiral Blue is a great example that is developing that capability and much modernized commercial models because when I look at the contractual terms that are available around the world, they're super duper restrictive and, to my mind, quite old-fashioned in many examples. I think there's a lot of room there to be competitive on the Australian side. Stop there.
Thanks, Donna. So over to you, please, Nan. I think there's also a question about what is the satellite that's in the background that we can see?
Oh, you've put me on the spot. I think this is Sentinel-2, I think. But now I'm going to have to quickly go back to no, it's not. There we go. Jonathan knows. Quick, tell me. Oh my gosh. Okay, I'll have to Google myself here and figure that out. So I'll get back to you on that. Okay, so my it's in the file name, so I have to just go back into my computer and see what it's called. Someone else might know. WorldView 3? I don't know. I don't know if it's WorldView 3. You think it's WorldView 3? Okay, we're going to have to start a competition. My aspiration for 2026. So I sort of see this really humming space and EO ecosystem where startups and SMEs among the big global primes can continue to emerge and thrive into successful, diverse and innovative scaled up businesses. And I think, communities like this can really help support the landscape for that ecosystem to thrive. And my aspiration also is around this, so connected, sustainable, embedded, enabling, exportable and globally vital ecosystem. So, and I'm really excited to be a part of it. And I guess my big message is we don't need to wait anymore. The capability is here now. And throwing back to Trevor in his plenary around the urgency, look, I really feel that that is here right now too. There's some users that really need the answers that we can provide and deliver into their businesses right now. And I'm really excited about the capability that our community brings to answer these global problems right here from Australia.
Fantastic. That's given us lots of words, I think, to put into this poll that is posted there in the chat. So members of the audience, if you resonated with any of those words or have any of your own, just a reminder to keep those coming so that we can collect a community response. Reese, over to you. Australian Earth Observation 2026, what does it look like?
Good morning. Sorry, afternoon. I think it's going to be vibrant. I think it's going to be alive with the opportunities and the excitement that goes around the potential of having our own missions. So from the Space Agency, that's what we're all about, is that space angle of the EO infrastructure. And so I think it's going to be incredibly exciting for the EO community, for the space community, because we have aspirations to build things here, and it's going to be exciting for society in general to see Australia being able to look down upon itself, be a contributor to global systems and meeting needs, doing all that great stuff. So yeah, vibrant.
Fantastic, thanks Reese. And last but not least, Kate, your thoughts?
Thanks, everyone. Look, it was a good introduction going through all those plans, and there is a question about how we bring them all together. But I really think that the work that has been done over the past couple of years with the creation of the Space Agency, the funding of the SmartSat CRC, there's been a whole lot of initiatives that are really going to be bearing their fruit 5 years from now. A lot of the stuff that we're talking about is big projects, big dreams, and I think we'll be spending the next 5 years delivering them. But I also wanted to highlight that we're going to be a much bigger community in 5 years from now. It's going to be a big shift for us. We've got to be educating a whole lot of people now to deliver on all of these plans 5 years from now. So more national programs, more business, but I also think us delivering our capabilities in the region a lot more as well. So yes, absolutely, Australia on a global scale, but also supporting our neighbours in making the best use of Earth observation technology. It's a great opportunity for us and it's an exciting time.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, Kate, and one that sort of passes across a few of those responses there. Often we're finding that capability exists, and it's a case of actually enabling that and supporting that to really maximize its impact. So a really nice point that you raised. So it's sort of the final seconds for members of the audience to contribute their words into Menti. The link is there in chat. otherwise, Karen, can we take a look at what the community thinks is in store for Australian Earth observation in 2026?
Yeah, absolutely. Let's check it out, shall we? That one though. All right, so you can see 57 people have responded so far, and the most responses have come through for integrated and collaborative. So you can still keep responding to these if you just click on the link in the chat. So just 2 words to think of what things are going to look like for us within the next 5 years.
Stuart, what do you think? Does that resonate with your thinking?
Yeah, I mean, that it's got the right words in it, and I think it's interesting looking at the comments that have come through, and it's I think, I guess with my thinking, it's coming out of what is across Earth Observation Australia, and it's integrated and collaborative, and I think those words also build on each of our panel speakers, where they are talking about being able to work together more effectively and push up our capacity and doing it in a smart way. I think David Antoine's just posted an interesting comment in the chat there as well. And how do we make sure we don't make things overly complex? And that might be something we come back to in the next section. All right. So cool. All right. So Amy, are you happy if we move on to the next section?
Yeah, let's go ahead.
Okay, cool. So let me just share the screen again. Okay. All right. So what we're doing now is looking even further forward. And I think a lot of us will tend to work in 2 to 3 year timeframes for planning, but looking at 10 years ahead is quite challenging. I mean, if you compare to where we were 10 years ago, in 2011 with data access, satellites, compute, all of these things, what's it going to look like in 10 years? So what we've asked our panel to do is taking into account those national plans that we've showed you and that you can all have a look at and contribute to in reviewing. How can we most effectively work, across the different components of Earth observation communities to achieve that more collaborative, integrative, smart way of having the different levels of government, being able to work with industry, startups, small to medium enterprises, large industry, defence, education, research, to build the capacities that we need in our own areas to collect and use Earth observation data, and to be able to do that with Australian-based systems, and also to give back globally to other countries and other groups that we have benefited from for the last 50 plus years. So we're going to flip back to each of the speakers. Some of the speakers have slides, some don't, but I'll stop sharing my screen and hand over to Kate Williams from Frontier SI for the first response there.
No worries, thanks Stuart. And no, I don't have any slides. I usually kill people with PowerPoint, so today I decided not to. I just wanted to start it when Stuart sent through the email about this session. I was thinking to myself, it's funny to ask us about 2026 and then ask us about 2030. Isn't my answer going to be the same? And I thought about it a little bit, in a quote that has been attributed to many people, but most recently Bill Gates came to mind, and that's that we always overestimate the change that will occur in the short term and underestimate change that will occur in the long term. And 10 years is a long time. 10 years is enough time for Australia to coordinate and do really big things. And it's also enough time for technology to change enough that we might even not be able to predict what it looks like. So I kind of, when I was thinking about this question, I was thinking, how different could 2030 be? And I think the answer is very different. Stuart touched on the fact that the Australian Earth observation community has been very active. We've been global leaders in a lot of things, but we've also lots of the time been consumers of other nations' investment, and maybe done leapfrogging on technology that's come from overseas. I definitely think we will be a larger part of the global supply chain, and also playing a part in larger global initiatives. And I really enjoyed the speech this morning from Laura, who showed us that NASA program, JEDI, and that's exactly the type of international program that we'll be benefiting from, but also the type of program that we can contribute to global initiatives. And this is about everyone right across the world in all the different kind of economies benefiting from Earth observation and from work being done here in Australia. I think we're going to have a much higher profile. We're not going to be able to enjoy sitting in the background anymore. I think with the number of launches, SASat-1, you know, every time a shuttle is launched or a satellite, it gets on the news. So we're going to have a high profile industry with people wanting to get involved. And I think that's the opportunity that we're going to be building now, so that we have a super vibrant community in 2030. And I really liked something else that Laura said this morning that I was thinking about, which is this idea of moving from concepts like open data to open science, and us being an industry that can be accessible to lots of different people, and part of a broader data science community.
Excellent. Thanks very much, Kate. And I guess also a reminder, if you do have questions, to keep putting them into the window that we were working with before, so the Go Soapbox window, not the chat window for this one. And what we'll do now is move on to our next speaker. So Reese Peterson from the Australian Space Agency. And Reese, I'll just bring that slide up for you.
Thanks, Stu.
There you go.
Hey, everyone. So to how we're going to work together, I just want to sort of stake out the Australian Space Agency's piece in this, which is very much around that space element. And so we, as Stu said before, we are very close to having our Earth observation roadmap finalised. It's going through last edits and things along those lines after a lot of consultation broadly, and a lot of you folks in the meeting today have contributed to that. So thank you very much. And because it's so close, I'm not going to talk about it directly, but I'm going to talk, describe elements of it. And the most key element of it is the scope of this roadmap, which helps describe how the Australian Space Agency sees itself engaging with the Earth observation community. And that is about that, what we're going to call the upstream element. So those three pieces you can see there, something that does collection, so satellites, bits that talk to, control, and downlink the data from the satellites, and the first place that stuff gets stored. So they're the things that we are trying to help guide through our roadmap to say, hey, look, we've been amazing as a nation, for over 40 years accessing data, from Landsat and most of the other systems around the world for a very long time. We're very good at using data we get. And what we want to do is build upon that expertise to help design what those upstream bits should look like. So what could the nation actually do? Should we design a new data source or an increased frequency of something? It's literally all on the table. And I wanted to take the opportunity to highlight the criticality of this community to be bringing that expertise forward, because they're the signals that actually say what gets built. So that hopefully you can see that the little blue thing on the bottom, it's saying from the people who are deeply into analysis and the people who are deeply into the tailoring element, so actually bringing the value of Earth observation data to the decision makers, to the community writ large, they have incredible insights into what would make that data better, or what are the things we need to understand better, what are the things we need to analyze and be able to decide about. And by feeding that knowledge through into the design elements of what should these satellites look like, what do the sensors need to achieve, the sorts of revisit times, the resolution, all of that goes onto the table to then deliver that back into it. And I think there's some really exciting opportunities there to say, given the rise of artificial intelligence and machine learning for improved analysis and tailoring for that matter, does that mean we need to work with the sort of collection systems that we've always had that have by and large been designed to be looked at by people? Perhaps there's different ways those sensors could look at different ways to be tailored to go into machines instead. And the machines generate things that are more readily interpretable by us as images. So that's just one way I'd like to sort of a challenge out there to say, maybe instead of saying, oh, we just need a higher resolution, this or that particular thing, maybe there's another way to look at it that feeds an interesting analytical process instead. And that's pretty much, that's the key point I'd like to make, is that our roadmap is getting close to being done, and it's going to be about the space segment. It recognises the expertise inherent in groups like this across the Australian community, and it deeply needs that input as it moves forward. Thanks, Stu.
No worries. Thanks very much, Reese. Okay, so moving on to our next speaker. So Alyssa Starkey from Ausius. So we'll move a bit more into the private industry side of things. Over to you, Alyssa.
Thanks, Stuart, and thanks, everyone. So I guess what I wanted to bring to this conversation was really around the excitement that I see the community coming together around these roadmaps and pathways to work together to achieve the best outcomes for our community. I think we are big enough that we can do that, but small enough that we must do that in order to not create silos and it's a real opportunity to leverage across research, government and private capability to be the best we all can, I guess. But what comes to my mind is really around the fact that we're not on solid ground. So there's some shifting sands from that we get from our customers' needs changing, international capability, international opportunities, new partnerships, new collaborations, new technologies. So while we set on these pathways for these roadmaps, and they must be there, they're really important. They help startups understand where funding might be, where priorities might be. However, I see also the startup community are awesome at disrupting things, and in that disruption, it is a really positive disruption though, in that it brings new capabilities quickly to market. And the other thing I think I wanted to sort of talk about today was 5 years ago, I was sort of talking a lot around, a data tsunami is coming. We've got to have smarter ways of dealing with big data. But now I actually see for the next 10 years, an innovation tsunami coming. It's coming from within government. It's coming from within industry. It's coming from all different directions, which is really exciting. But we can't forget our users either. And I think that sort of goes back to making it simple and not over complex. We have to be able to integrate our skills and amazing brains in really simplistically to encourage that uptake and use, to make it easy. We don't want to make it hard for everyone. And the only other point that I want to really bring, last two things, was just that I think sometimes there's it sort of goes back to the roadmaps in the space and spatial roadmap that is that I think sometimes there's a perception that startups are just sitting here waiting for research or other ideas. And I think what I see the most happening is that all you need is an idea, but you must test that idea, and you must test it commercially as well to make it viable, make sure it's viable. We've seen great research that isn't commercially viable. We see great ideas that aren't commercially viable, and vice versa. We want to find the ones that are going to work, and to promote our community use and uptake. And so I really just want to point out that I think in the next 10 years, we're also going to start seeing the the ideas coming from outside of our community, and so just being open to where those ideas come from, where we can all contribute to. And then the last thing was just that we're not at peak innovation. So I'm really excited to see what new tech's coming, what integrated skills, what solutions we'll bring in the next 10 years. Thanks.
No worries. Okay, thanks very much, Alyssa. Just want to acknowledge Reese. He's been called away for something urgent at the moment. Thanks very much for your time.
Thanks, Chief.
Reese. No worries. Okay, now we're going to switch gears again and hand over to Donna Lawler. And we did have an interesting preparation conversation on this. So I do hope Donna's going to talk about glunkiness.
Awesome. It's true. I am going to talk about glunkiness because my experience with dealing with some Earth observation imagery providers is that their commercial models are glunky. So thank you for reminding me of that word again, Stuart, because I think what we're going to see by 2030 is consolidation. So any dinosaur company that remains glunky won't be around. So I think we're going to be seeing consolidation of companies, and there will be one or two or three big players like Apple or Facebook. What is the equivalent going to be in Earth observation? Is it going to be Planet, or is it going to be one of our own? Is it going to be Alula? Is it going to be Spiral Blue? So any company that doesn't have customer-friendly legal terms and user-friendly platform and is not going to survive. 2030 also, let me just give one pessimistic view. Here's one pessimistic view of what it might look like. We could actually have so much space junk up there by then, and so much hogging of spectrum by large companies, or even worse, we might have a space war, that the whole thing becomes unusable. So in terms of what we need to do to cooperate, we need to cooperate not just at the Australia level, but at the international level to make sure that there is good space citizenship, appropriate sharing of resources like spectrum, like orbits, and that we start to globally, at a global level, tone down the rhetoric about space as a warfighting domain and space wars, and start to think more about how we can cooperate to preserve it for everyone, because this is a fragile resource. All of us around the world need to continue to be able to use it. I suspect that we're not just going to be talking about Earth observation, we're going to be looking at observation at a lunar level and possibly also Mars by 2030, assuming we don't mess up space entirely. And then, so that's something to keep in mind. We're going to have everyone that's just talking about Earth, if we're going to be talking about Earth and space. And then lastly, currently Australia has a superpower, which is we don't need a specific license to conduct remote sensing as you do in the United States and Canada and other places. Is the United States going to try and strong arm us into including our own licensing regime, or are we going to keep our superpower? I kind of hope that we retain the freedom to conduct remote sensing without too much oversight from either the United States or our own government. And I'll stop there.
Excellent points to finish off on, Donna, and those are key things that often we take for granted and don't think about. So that takes us to the final part of the panel, which will be Jonathan Ross. So, John, I'm going to share the screen with your slides, and is that all right?
Thank you, Stuart. So the kind of brief I got was to talk about Australia as a global EO contributor, no longer a data sinkhole. And I don't know if that was you, Stuart, but I really like that analogy, actually. But look, I think our reputation as a bit of a freeloader is actually one I think we can wear with a bit of pride for how far we've come. I think our approach has really delivered impact from the data, and a number of speakers have commented on that. And I think globally that is respected, and people are leveraging and benefiting from what we've done, and it is valued. And, you know, critically, the downstream side is big and growing. And the recent studies have clearly shown that, including the APEC report on the screen there. And I've put the link there. It's definitely worth having a look. And more importantly, what that report shows is this, you know, taking advantage of this huge economic opportunity in front of us, we actually get more benefit if we cooperate with others. There's actually a specific chapter in there around, well, what's the economic value of this stuff into the future? And if we all work together, how much bigger is it? And it's actually quite a lot. So I think the application space continues. I'd pick up on David's point. I think that user engagement is key, and we have to broaden our understanding of users, perhaps to not just be, you know, how do we meet the needs of a narrow group of, you know, the real remote sensing gurus? How do we make that data easier to use for a much broader group? And some of these things around commercial terms and licensing terms are definitely a part of that. And that includes building those linkages with, e.g., agtech, fintech, regtech, and other partners who provide pathways to uptake. And these are global markets. So I think as a global contributor, we have a lot to contribute in the area we're already strong in. But for me, we've definitely reached a point where we need to take further steps to contribute and engage globally. And if you go to the next slide, Stuart, I come back to our calibration and validation work, and it's a stellar example of the opportunity between now and 2030. We have a great foundation. Our work here is a key area where we already do give back. We've built our profile, and it has helped us get a seat at the table on important missions and leverage beyond our financial investment. But this recently released AusCalVal report shows there is a really great opportunity to scale this up if we act. Australia is essentially uniquely placed to become the world's go-to for quality assurance of sensors and applications. The diversity of our geography, the skill base, the data sets we have an amazing foundation to do that. And as these questions around trust and integrity and quality increase, and as the applications market grows, we are really uniquely placed to carve that out as our space globally. And that's not just something that we can make money from, it's actually something that will be appreciated internationally as well, that someone has stepped up in that space. The time's also come, as I said before, to give serious thought to step up in the space segment. If you bring up the next slide, Stuart. But I do think we need to be, we need to think carefully, and Reese mentioned the roadmap process. What does that mean? We need to avoid the thought trap that the options we have in front of us are complete independence in space or complete dependence. We can continue to be omnivorous and take advantage of what others do. And I think by 2030, we will be doing that. That approach means we have richer applications and actually makes what we're doing more resilient to some of the scenarios talked about before. If every application uses data from multiple sources from multiple countries, that's a win for us. And that's not just for us, that's many other countries are increasingly concerned with the resilience of their digital and other supply chains as well. So I think by 2030, that's definitely a space we can be world leading in. And on the satellite side, we saw some really important opportunities emerging around the small 25 to 100 kilo satellites. And if you bring up the next slide, Stuart, I would draw people's attention to some of the work that's been done, I guess, to take that from kind of theoretical discussions on what a good mission might be into practical discussions of what's actually involved in building that and how close to being able to do it are we. And there's a number there that have been done in support of that EO roadmap process. And really it's about what are those areas where we can do things that help us, that our partners would also value and not just say, hey, why are you duplicating that? That are things our partners probably wouldn't choose to do as their first priority, but are important to us and that are realistic for our industry in the near term. And that's really important because if we said tomorrow, by 2030, we want everything to be built and paid for by Australia, we would have a lot of trouble. But the real question is, how do we take the journey over the next 9 years to progressively build our sovereign manufacturing and operations capability? How do we do that in a really considered way that takes us from where we're at now at about 5 kilos to 25 to 50 to 100 and then, hopefully beyond that. But how do we do that in a stepwise way? And my vision is by 2030, we will really be contributing in these areas like cross-calibration, monitoring of data integrity, water quality, fuel loads, and we've got the studies to back that up now. We've already had offers from international community to actually help us on that journey as well. So I think achieving all of this by 2030 is entirely realistic. And I think in my view, we should set our sights there and start the journey as a community through EOA. Thanks.
Excellent. All right. Thanks very much, Jono, and thanks for being on time. Might hand back over to Amy and then also Karen if we can check back in on the Menti results for the 10-year more futurist looking things. So Amy, over to you.
Sure. So we have about, maybe we have about 5 minutes, do you think, Stuart, to look at some of the questions that have been posted on Go Soapbox. So there's been quite a lot of activity coming up there. And let's start at the top where we have the most highly voted question from the audience to the panel, which is that we've talked today about a lot of different national strategic documents that have been recently released or are about to be released. And how can the EO sector become a more unified force? And it's that word that seems to have popped up quite a lot today, and perhaps that's the million-dollar question, is how can the EO sector become a more unified force into the future? So any volunteers from the panel to tackle that one?
I can, if you like, Amy, I can get started.
Yeah, go ahead. Thanks.
Look, I think when you compare it to other industries, we're actually we're quite small, and you'll find there's kind of 3 degrees of separation at the most. But I do think that now that we have a space agency, and you can see each state is publishing, developing space strategies, and in fact some states have actually gone on to their second version, we'll see government and industry having some clear directions that they can unify around. I think that we're actually, like I said before, I think we're actually making the right steps to do that. But my one comment would be that we must always include the private sector. Sometimes it's very easy to have a government conversation and maybe invite some of your favorite researchers in. I think for us to have a unified sector, we must keep our focus on the private as well.
Thanks, Kate. Yeah, really relevant thoughts. How about Elisa? Did you have any comments on that from the private sector perspective?
I think Donna's busting to say something too, but so on this, but yeah, this unification, yeah, absolutely. Look, it's going to look, I think, yeah, totally agree with what Kate said. And that I think that perspective of across the board, it's not just yet large government, but bringing in small business, medium business, and also because we're connected to end users and what those needs are very closely. And so I think by bringing in those sort of smaller businesses and startups and getting across the board, then you're also ticking the box around those end use cases as well. And having said that, you know, there's other parts of the ecosystem, the startup ecosystem, that work with upstream. It's not all downstream. So being able to actually consider that end-to-end ecosystem and not just analysis and processing or whatnot is going to be really critical moving forward in that unification.
Great, thank you. And perhaps, Donna, perhaps we'll squeeze in your final thoughts on that point, and then we're probably moving towards the end of our town hall today.
I completely agree. Oh, sorry, Donna. Sorry.
Oh, just very quickly, because Jonathan, I want you to be able to say something too. I think it's right that we are relying on the Australian Space Agency to coordinate government, but everyone has to play their role. In terms of including government, including private sector, and not just the big end of town, but the small end of town, government procurement rules are often the key to that, and the way that they impose legal terms, Australian industry capability, inclusion. Defence is starting to get quite active and you could even say aggressive in a good way about including Australian companies and making sure that the big primes actually do include small companies in a meaningful way. And I think government needs to start developing at the state and federal level more sophistication about how to include small companies, make sure they're included, but without crushing them in the process with horrible legal terms.
Thanks, Donna. Jono, did you want to give some?
And apologies to Donna. I thought you said Jono. I was need another coffee, but I'm just going to say I completely agree with everything that's been said. From our point of view, EOA actually has a key role to play, and that's why GA is actually investing additional resources in EOA to provide that convening role, because government has a role to play. We definitely do, but everyone has a role to play, and we do need to connect those things. And I think EOA is uniquely placed to do that. But I will add another curly one in there, which is this space and spatial thing makes it even harder, but is even more important. We absolutely have to get those linkages right. I think having the space agency there has certainly made a big step, but what we probably don't want to do is fall into the trap that we've seen in other jurisdictions where it all becomes about cool stuff in space. The data gets to the ground and it doesn't get used. We are well positioned not to make that mistake that has been made in so many other jurisdictions. So thank you all. Thanks,
Jono. And over to you, Stuart.
Thanks very much, Amy, and thanks very much to everyone on the panel. That was a really good point, I think, to end up with. I'm just going to go back to the slides for a second. That last point that Jono mentioned leads into the concluding section here. There was a lot of that discussion was, how do we put together a number of these plans? How do we become more unified? Participating in today, listening, going away and knowing that you can engage as part of this community is a start of that unification. And as Jono said there, we now have a space agency there, which is really letting us dig into, the upstream side in terms of, the data access and the data provision, as Reese showed you. That's going to be a focus of, the road mapping activities. And then we've got space and spatial and the link to, the actual use and application of this space-based information. And, what we're trying to enable with meetings like this one is that it is about government, it is about all the different levels of industry and the groups that do research in there, plus, the universities, the research institutions, community groups as well, being aware of those and working together. So we're going to continue that focus on building community. After today, every 2 months, we'll be having a webinar on building that unification and that community to keep things going. You'll see the Space Agency's Earth Observation Roadmap come out in that time, and that'll be a big push as part of that unification. So when we hopefully meet face-to-face in August 2022, for the face-to-face version of this, now we'll be able to come together and go, right, we've moved together in doing these things more proactively as a community and actually getting gains for each of our areas and working together more effectively. So with that, I would like to thank again, especially all of our panelists. So, Alyssa, Kate, Donna, Jono, and also Reese, who's left, and also thanks to Amy for co-chairing it with me. Time for lunch. We're back here in 45 minutes. So if everyone comes back here, then we'll move into the learning labs side of things as well. And Karen's just showing us where we are, I think, with the word cloud that we actually got. But we'll make sure this is available after today's meeting.